Eleanor Hale stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Cedar Ridge, expecting a wedding. What she got instead was a telegram that read like a death sentence. Cannot proceed. You are too tall. Do not come to the house. 27 years old, carrying everything she owned in 2 worn carpet bags, standing alone in a town where everyone already knew she'd been thrown away like spoiled meat. No return ticket, $18 to her name, and a choice that would either kill her or remake her completely. If you want to see how a woman everyone called too much turned rejection into an empire, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The telegram had been waiting at the general store, handed over by a clerk who wouldn't meet her eyes. Eleanor read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the words to change. They didn't. She stood there on the boardwalk, 6 feet tall in her traveling dress, while the afternoon sun pressed down like a hammer. People moved around her, a woman with a baby, 2 men hauling lumber, a boy chasing a dog. Normal life continuing while hers just ended. Miss Hale? She looked up. The clerk had followed her outside, wringing his hands. There's a boarding house 2 streets over, Mrs. Garvey's place. She might have a room. Eleanor's throat was too tight to answer. She nodded and picked up her bags. The boarding house smelled like boiled cabbage and old wood. Mrs. Garvey was a squat woman with sharp eyes that took in everything, the quality of Eleanor's dress, the weight of her bags, the way she had to duck slightly under the doorframe. $4 a week, Mrs. Garvey said, includes breakfast and supper. No men in the rooms, no cooking upstairs. Wash water's extra. Eleanor set down her bags. I'll take it for 1 week. Payment up front. Eleanor counted out the bills, watching her small fortune shrink to $14. Mrs. Garvey pocketed the money without comment and handed her a key. Room 3, top of the stairs. The room was barely bigger than a closet. A narrow bed, a washstand, a chair with one leg shorter than the others. Eleanor set her bags on the bed and sat beside them. Through the thin walls, she could hear someone coughing, water running, the creak of floorboards. She should cry. That's what women did in novels when their lives fell apart. But her eyes stayed dry. The shock was still too fresh, sitting in her chest like a stone. The rejection itself didn't surprise her. She'd known even in Boston that her unusual height made her unmarriageable by conventional standards. Men wanted wives who made them feel large and capable, not women who could look them level in the eye. Her aunts had said as much over and over, until Eleanor started to believe that spinsterhood was her only future. Then the ad appeared. Rancher seeking wife, must be strong, capable, suited to frontier life. Send photograph and particulars. She'd written back honestly. Age, education, background, and yes, height. 5 months of letters followed. Joseph Webb had seemed different, thoughtful. He wrote about books, about building something lasting, about wanting a partner rather than an ornament. She'd let herself hope. Stupid. Eleanor unpinned her hat and set it on the chair. Her reflection appeared in the small mirror above the washstand. Dark hair pulled back severely. Strong features that would never be called delicate. Broad shoulders. The body of a woman built for work, not for wanting. Too tall, she said to her reflection. As if I chose it. She should have known better. Men said they wanted capability until they actually saw it. Wanted strength until it was embodied in a woman who didn't need to look up at them. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Supper's at 6, Mrs. Garvey called through the wood. You coming down or not? Eleanor checked her watch. 5:45. I'll be down. The dining room held 6 boarders, including Eleanor. 2 rail workers who barely looked up from their plates. An older woman in widow's black who introduced herself as Mrs. Yates. A man who sold farm equipment and talked too much. And a younger woman, maybe 20, with tired eyes and a baby on her hip. That's Mary Sutton, Mrs. Garvey said, ladling some kind of stew onto Eleanor's plate. Husband worked the mines, died in a collapse last winter. Mary nodded at Eleanor but didn't speak. The baby fussed, and she shifted him to her other hip, trying to eat one-handed. Here, Eleanor said. Let me. She reached for the baby before thinking better of it. Mary hesitated, then passed him over. He was heavier than Eleanor expected, solid and warm. She settled him in the crook of her arm while Mary ate quickly, efficiently, like someone who'd learned to take what she could get. Thank you, Mary said when she'd finished. He's teething. Doesn't like being put down much these days. How old? 8 months. His name's Thomas. The baby grabbed a handful of Eleanor's collar and tried to stuff it in his mouth. Mary reached to stop him, but Eleanor shook her head. He's fine. Thomas gummed the fabric, then lost interest and leaned his head against Eleanor's shoulder. His weight was oddly comforting, evidence that she could still be useful to someone, even if she couldn't be wanted. After supper, Eleanor helped Mary carry water upstairs. The younger woman's room was smaller than Eleanor's, with a makeshift cradle in the corner. Mrs. Garvey lets me pay less since I help with washing, Mary explained. But it's still hard. I've been looking for work, but nobody wants to hire a woman with a baby. What kind of work? Anything. I can sew, cook, clean. I worked in a hotel in Denver before I got married, but here... She trailed off, settling Thomas in his cradle. Here. Women are supposed to have husbands. If you don't, people assume something's wrong with you. Eleanor thought about the telegram in her pocket. Yes, they do. Mary looked at her more carefully. You're the bride who came for Joseph Webb. It wasn't a question. Eleanor should have known the whole town would be talking. I was, Eleanor said. Past tense. I heard. Mary sat on her bed. He's an idiot. You know him? Everybody knows everybody here. Webb's got a decent spread about 8 miles out, but he's... Mary chose her words carefully. He's particular, picky. Had 2 mail-order brides before you, sent them both back. Eleanor's stomach went cold. He didn't mention that in his letters. No, I imagine he wouldn't. Mary picked at a thread on her blanket. First one wasn't pretty enough. Second one had a stammer. Now you're too tall. Meanwhile, he's 38 and getting older by himself. What happens to them? The women he sends back? First one had family in California. She left on the next stage. Second one... Mary's expression darkened. She stayed. Works at the Lucky Star now. Eleanor didn't need to ask what the Lucky Star was. Every frontier town had one. He ruined her. He didn't help her, that's for sure. Left her stranded with no money and a reputation. She did what she had to do. The stone in Eleanor's chest grew heavier. She could have been that woman. Still might be if she didn't find work soon. There has to be something, Eleanor said. Some kind of employment. You could try the hotel or the restaurant. Sometimes they need help during harvest season. Mary didn't sound hopeful. But like I said, most places don't want to hire single women. They think we're... She glanced at Thomas. Trouble. Eleanor left Mary's room feeling like the walls were closing in. Back in her own space, she counted her money again. $14. Maybe enough for another 3 weeks if she was careful. Then what? She couldn't go back to Boston. She'd sold everything to pay for the journey west, burned every bridge with the aunts who'd raised her. Going to make a spectacle of yourself out there, Aunt Margaret had said. Mark my words, Eleanor. That man will take one look at you and regret his choice. She'd been right. Eleanor hated that she'd been right. Sleep didn't come easily. The bed was lumpy, and through the walls she could hear Thomas crying. Mary's soft voice, trying to soothe him. The sound reminded Eleanor how alone she was. 27 years old, and she'd never even been kissed. Never been held. Never been anything except too much. Morning brought no solutions. Eleanor put on her other dress, dark blue, practical, and went downstairs. Mrs. Garvey was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hands in dishwater. There's coffee, she said without turning around. Bread's on the table. Eleanor poured herself a cup. The coffee was weak but hot. She was cutting a slice of bread when Mrs. Garvey spoke again. You planning to stay in Cedar Ridge? I don't know yet. Because if you are, you'll need work. Mrs. Garvey pulled her hands from the water and dried them on her apron. I might know someone who's hiring. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Who? Rowan Creed. He's got a ranch about 12 miles north, big operation. He came through yesterday asking if I knew anyone looking for work. Needs someone to help with cooking and housekeeping. A housekeeper? More than that. His last hand quit 2 months ago, and the place has gone to hell. He needs someone who can cook for a crew, keep the house running, maybe help with accounts. It's hard work. Long hours, but he pays fair. Eleanor set down her coffee. Why hasn't he found anyone? Mrs. Garvey smiled slightly. Because the ranch is isolated, the work's brutal, and Rowan Creed has a reputation. What kind of reputation? The quiet kind. He keeps to himself. Doesn't come to town much except for supplies. Some folks say he's strange. Others say he's just private. She shrugged. I've known him 10 years. He's always paid his bills and never caused trouble. But he's not social. Is he dangerous? Dangerous? Mrs. Garvey considered. No, just hard to know. But here's the thing. He won't care that you're tall. He won't care what people say about you or why you came here. He needs help, and if you can do the work, that's all that'll matter. Eleanor thought about her $14, about the lucky star, about the second bride who'd had no choice. How do I find him? He'll be at the feed store this afternoon picking up supplies. Big man, dark hair, usually wears a brown coat. You can't miss him. The feed store was on the edge of town, a long building that smelled like grain and leather. Eleanor arrived just after 2 and found 3 men loading bags onto a wagon. One of them fit Mrs. Garvey's description, tall, maybe 6'3", with broad shoulders and the kind of weathered face that made age hard to guess. 35, 40? He moved with the deliberate economy of someone who'd learned not to waste energy. Eleanor approached before she could lose her nerve. Mr. Creed? He turned. His eyes were an unexpected light brown, almost amber in the afternoon sun. They took her in with the same neutral assessment he might give a horse, noting details, making calculations. That's right. My name is Eleanor Hale. Mrs. Garvey said you're looking for help at your ranch. She did she? His voice was low, roughened by years of wind and dust. What kind of help are you offering? Cooking? Housekeeping? She mentioned you need someone to manage accounts as well. I can do that. I kept books for my uncle's shipping business in Boston. Boston? He said it like it was a foreign country. Long way from home. I'm not going back. Something flickered in his expression. Not quite interest, but attention. Why? Eleanor could have lied, made up something dignified. Instead, she told the truth. I came here to marry Joseph Webb. He rejected me. Now I need work. Rowan studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded toward the wagon. My crew's down to 4 men. We run cattle, some horses. The house needs considerable work. I can pay $15 a month plus room and board. Work starts at 5, ends when it's done. Sundays are shorter but not off. It's 12 miles from town, so you won't be coming and going. Once you're out there, you're out there. $15 a month. It wasn't much, but it was survival. What happened to your last housekeeper? Eleanor asked. Quit. Said it was too isolated. He paused. She wasn't wrong. I'm not afraid of isolation. Afraid of hard work? No. Then you can start tomorrow if you want. Be here at dawn. I'll drive you out. Eleanor extended her hand. Thank you, Mr. Creed. He looked at her hand like he wasn't sure what to do with it. Then he shook it once, briefly. His grip was calloused and strong. Call me Rowan, he said. And don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the place. That night, Eleanor packed her bags for the second time in 3 days. Mary appeared in her doorway, Thomas on her hip. Mrs. Garvey told me, you're going to work for Rowan Creed. Yes. Mary looked worried. Are you sure? That ranch is so far from everything. I'm sure. Eleanor folded her other dress and tucked it into the carpet bag. I don't have a lot of choices, Mary. I know. Mary shifted Thomas to her other side. Be careful. Men out here, when they're alone like that, sometimes they get ideas. If he tries anything, I'll break his nose. Mary laughed despite herself. You probably could. I definitely could. Eleanor smiled, but it felt fragile. Thank you for being kind to me. Not everyone was. We have to look out for each other, Mary said quietly. Women like us, we don't have anybody else. Eleanor thought about that after Mary left. Women like us. Cast-offs. Inconvenient. Too tall, too widowed, too whatever the world decided we were. Maybe Mary was right. Maybe they only had each other. But tomorrow, she'd have work. A purpose. Something to do besides count her shrinking money and wonder what came next. It would have to be enough. Dawn came cold and blue. Eleanor was waiting outside the boarding house when Rowan pulled up in a wagon loaded with supplies. He nodded to her but didn't speak. She climbed up beside him, settling her bags at her feet. The town fell away behind them. Fields gave way to scrubland, then to rougher country dotted with juniper and sage. The road, if it could be called that, was barely more than wagon ruts worn into dirt. "How long have you had the ranch?" Eleanor asked. 8 years. Bought it from a man who couldn't make it work. "And you've made it work?" "So far?" He didn't elaborate. They drove in silence after that. Eleanor watched the landscape change, growing wilder and more beautiful. Mountains rose in the distance, still capped with snow despite the summer heat. Hawks circled overhead. The air smelled clean and sharp. After 2 hours, they crested a ridge, and Eleanor saw it. A valley spread out below, with a river cutting through the center. Buildings clustered near the water, a house, a barn, several smaller structures. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures. It looked like something from a painting, isolated and self-contained. "That's it," Rowan said. "The Creed Ranch." As they descended into the valley, Eleanor could see the place more clearly. The barn was well maintained, freshly painted. The outbuildings looked sturdy, but the house was a disaster. Rowan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of it. "I know," he said. "It needs work." That was an understatement. The porch sagged on one side. 2 windows were covered with boards. The front door hung slightly crooked. It looked like a place that had given up. "The structure's sound," Rowan said, climbing down. "Everything else is just neglect." Eleanor stepped onto the porch carefully, testing each board. Inside was worse. The main room was large but filthy. Dust covered every surface. The fireplace was clogged with old ash. Dishes were piled in the kitchen, weeks' worth, maybe months. The whole place smelled stale and forgotten. "Your room's upstairs," Rowan said. "Second door on the right. It's clean." "I made sure of that." Eleanor climbed the stairs, which creaked under her weight. The room was small, but decent. A real bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over the valley. Someone, Rowan, she assumed, had made an effort here. The floor was swept. The bed had fresh linens. She set down her bags and looked out the window. 4 men were working near the barn, mending a fence. They were too far away to see clearly, but she could hear their voices carrying on the wind. Downstairs, Rowan was unloading supplies from the wagon. "I'll introduce you to the crew at supper," he said. "For now, do what you can with the kitchen. I know it's bad." "Where do you sleep?" Eleanor asked. "Barn, mostly. Haven't used the house much since Martha left." "Martha was your housekeeper?" "Yeah." He set down a sack of flour. "She lasted 3 months. Said the silence made her crazy." Eleanor rolled up her sleeves. "The silence doesn't bother me. We'll see." She started with the dishes. It took 4 trips to the well to haul enough water, and her arms ached by the time she had a fire going and the first pot heating. The work was mindless and exhausting, but she was grateful for it. It gave her something to focus on besides the fear that she'd made a terrible mistake. By late afternoon, she'd made a dent in the chaos. The dishes were clean and put away. The counters were scrubbed. The floor was swept. She found a stores of beans, salt pork, and dried apples and started supper. The crew came in at sunset, stomping dirt off their boots. 4 men, all of them stopping short when they saw Eleanor. "This is Miss Hale," Rowan said. "She'll be managing the house." The youngest one, barely 20, stared openly. "Ma'am." "Eleanor's fine," she said. "Supper will be ready in 10 minutes. There's water for washing outside." They ate in near silence, the men too tired or too wary to talk much. Eleanor sat at the end of the table, aware of them watching her when they thought she wasn't looking. She was used to it. People always watched. After they left, Rowan stayed behind to help with the dishes. "You don't have to do that," Eleanor said. "I know." He dried a plate and set it aside. "They'll talk about you. The crew, just so you know. Let them. Doesn't bother you?" "I've been talked about my whole life," Eleanor said. "One more place won't make a difference." Rowan was quiet for a moment, then, "For what it's worth, I think Webb's a fool." Eleanor's hands stilled in the dishwater. "Why?" "Because he ordered strength and then complained when it arrived." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in days. Eleanor's throat went tight. "Thank you," she managed. Rowan just nodded and went back to drying dishes. That night, alone in her room, Eleanor lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds, the wind against the house, cattle lowing in the distance. Somewhere, a coyote called, high and lonely. She thought about Joseph Webb, sitting in his house 8 miles away, probably congratulating himself on a narrow escape. She thought about the second bride, working at the Lucky Star. She thought about all the ways a woman could be discarded. Then she thought about Rowan's words, ordered strength, and then complained when it arrived. Maybe she had been ordered. Maybe this place had been waiting for her all along, and Joseph Webb was just a wrong turn on the way to something better. Or maybe she was lying to herself. Maybe this was just another kind of trap, and she'd figure that out too late. Either way, she was here now. 12 miles from town, in a house that was falling apart, working for a man she didn't know. But she had work. She had a room. She had $15 a month and a chance to prove that being too tall, too strong, too much might actually be enough. Outside, the coyote called again. This time, Eleanor closed her eyes and let the sound carry her toward sleep. Tomorrow, she'd start rebuilding. The house first, then maybe herself. The first week passed in a blur of scrubbing and hauling and discovering just how much damage neglect could do. Eleanor attacked the house like it was a personal enemy, working from dawn until her hands cramped and her back screamed. The kitchen came first, then the main room, then the upstairs hallway that smelled like mice had died in the walls. Rowan and his crew left before sunrise and came back after dark, eating whatever she put in front of them without comment. The youngest hand, Danny, sometimes tried to make conversation, but the others kept their distance. She learned their names by listening. Jack, the oldest, who had a limp from some old injury, Curtis, who never smiled, and Ben, who watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. By the end of the second week, she'd established a rhythm. Up at 4:30 to get the stove going, breakfast at 5. Then cleaning, mending, or working through the disaster that passed for Rowan's account books. Lunch at noon, brought out to wherever the men were working. Supper at 7. Dishes. Bed by 9. Too exhausted to think. It should have been miserable. Instead, Eleanor felt something close to contentment. Her body ached constantly, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that came from useful work. Nobody here cared that she was too tall. Nobody whispered about her behind their hands. She was just the woman who kept the house running, and that was enough. On Sunday morning, she woke to find Rowan already in the kitchen making coffee. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." He poured 2 cups and handed her one. "Thought I'd get a head start on fixing that porch before it collapses." Eleanor sipped the coffee. It was terrible, but hot. "Need help? You don't have to work today." "Neither do you." He almost smiled. Almost. "Fair point. You know anything about carpentry?" "I can hand you tools and hold things steady." "That'll do." They worked through the morning in comfortable silence. Rowan ripped out the rotten boards and measured new ones while Eleanor held the level and fetched nails. The physical work felt good after a week of indoor cleaning. The sun was warm on her shoulders, and the air smelled like fresh-cut pine. "You're stronger than you look," Rowan said, watching her haul a board into place. "I look pretty strong. You look like you could throw most men through a wall if you wanted to." Eleanor glanced at him, trying to figure out if he was mocking her, but his expression was neutral, matter of fact. "I probably could," she said. "Good. Ben's been getting mouthy lately. Might need throwing." This time she did see the hint of humor in his eyes. "What's his problem?" "Hard to say. He's always got a chip on his shoulder about something." Rowan hammered a nail with 3 precise strikes. "Just keep your distance. He's not dangerous, but he's not pleasant either." They finished the porch by early afternoon. Rowan tested each board, putting his full weight on it, nodding when nothing creaked. "That'll hold," he said. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Eleanor wiped sweat from her forehead. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why did you really hire me?" Rowan set down his hammer. "I needed help." "You could have hired anyone. Why someone from town? Why someone in my situation?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the valley. "Because I know what it's like to need a second chance," he said finally, "and because I figured anyone desperate enough to work out here wasn't going to leave the first time things got hard." It was honest, even if it wasn't particularly flattering. Eleanor appreciated that. "I won't leave," she said. "I know." That night at supper, Ben broke the usual silence. "How much longer are you planning to stay?" he asked Eleanor, not looking up from his plate. Long as Mr. Creed needs me, she said. Seems like a waste. Woman like you, stuck out here doing laundry and cooking, could probably find a husband in town if you tried. The table went very still. Danny's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Jack stared at his plate like it might catch fire. Ben, Rowan said quietly, that's enough. I'm just saying she doesn't belong out here. This isn't work for... I said that's enough. The tone left no room for argument. Ben's jaw tightened, but he went back to eating. The rest of the meal passed in tense silence. After the men left, Rowan stayed behind again. Eleanor started washing dishes without speaking. I'm sorry about that, Rowan said. Don't be. I've heard worse. Still shouldn't have said it. Eleanor scrubbed a pot harder than necessary. He's right, though. I don't belong here. I don't belong anywhere. That's not true, isn't it? She turned to face him. I was too tall for Boston, too unmarriageable for Joseph Webb, too much of everything for everyone. At least here I'm useful. That's more than I had before. Rowan picked up a dish towel. You know what I think? What? I think you've spent your whole life letting other people tell you what you are. Maybe it's time you decided for yourself. Eleanor opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She didn't have an answer for that. Get some sleep, Rowan said. Tomorrow we're moving cattle to the north pasture. I'll need lunch brought out around noon. He left before she could respond. Eleanor stood alone in the kitchen, his words echoing in her head. Decide for yourself. As if it were that simple. As if she hadn't spent 27 years trying to fit herself into spaces that were always too small, always the wrong shape. But maybe he had a point. Maybe she'd been so busy apologizing for existing that she'd forgotten to just exist. The next morning, she loaded lunch into the wagon and drove it out to the north pasture herself. The crew was scattered across the hillside, moving cattle through a narrow gate. Eleanor parked near the fence line and watched them work. It was coordinated chaos. Men on horseback cutting individual animals from the herd, dogs darting between hooves, dust rising in thick clouds. Rowan saw her and rode over. You didn't have to bring it yourself. I know. I wanted to see what you do all day. He swung down from his horse, a big roan gelding with intelligent eyes. It's not exciting, just moving animals from one place to another. It looks hard. It is. He pulled off his gloves and tucked them in his belt. But it's good work. Honest work. They ate lunch sitting on the wagon bed, watching the cattle settle into their new pasture. The other men kept their distance, clustering together under a cottonwood tree. They don't like me much, Eleanor said. They don't know you. Give them time. Ben's not going to come around. Probably not. But the others will. Rowan bit into a biscuit. This is good, by the way. Everything you make is good. It's just food. It's the first decent food I've had in 6 months. Martha couldn't cook worth a damn. Eleanor smiled despite herself. What made her leave? Really? She got lonely, started walking into town every few days, then every day, finally just stopped coming back. He shrugged. Can't blame her. This life isn't for everyone. Were you lonely before she left? The question surprised him. I don't know, maybe. I got used to being alone a long time ago. That's not the same as not being lonely. No, he agreed. It's not. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the cattle and the wind. Eleanor found herself acutely aware of how close they were sitting. She could see the sunlines around his eyes, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the way his hands were scarred and calloused from years of hard work. I should get back, she said, standing abruptly. I've got laundry to finish. If Rowan noticed her sudden awkwardness, he didn't comment. Thanks for bringing lunch out. You're welcome. She drove the wagon back faster than she needed to, trying to outrun the strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't attraction. She wouldn't let it be attraction. That was a complication she couldn't afford. But that night, lying in bed, she caught herself thinking about the way he'd looked sitting on the wagon bed, squinting into the sun. The way his voice went soft when he talked about loneliness. The way he'd defended her to Ben without making it a big production. Stop it, she told herself. This is a job, nothing more. The weather turned hot and mean. August in the high country was like living inside a furnace. Eleanor started her days even earlier, trying to get the heavy work done before the heat became unbearable. The vegetable garden she'd planted behind the house withered despite daily watering. The creek ran lower, and the cattle clustered in whatever shade they could find. One afternoon, she was in the main room attempting to wrestle the account books into some kind of order when she heard shouting outside. She went to the window and saw Ben and Curtis facing off near the barn, both of them red-faced and furious. "You calling me a liar?" Ben shoved Curtis backward. "I'm saying you're lazy, which you are." Ben swung. Curtis ducked and came back with a punch that connected with Ben's jaw. Then they were both on the ground, rolling in the dust, fists flying. Eleanor ran outside just as Rowan emerged from the barn. He waded into the fight, grabbing both men by their collars and hauling them apart with the kind of strength that looked effortless but probably wasn't. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "He started it," Ben said, breathing hard. "Like hell I did. You've been skipping work all week and I'm tired of covering for you." "Boys," Rowan said, and the word cut through the argument like a knife. "I don't care who started it. I care that it stops. Now." "He can't talk to me like that," Ben said. "He can, and he did. And if you've got a problem with how things run here, you know where the road is." Ben's face went darker. "You taking his side?" "I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm telling you both to get back to work before I fire you both and do it myself." Curtis nodded and headed back toward the barn. Ben stood there a moment longer, his jaw working. Then he spat in the dust and walked away. Rowan watched him go, then turned to Eleanor. "You all right?" "I'm fine. Are you?" "Yeah." He rolled his shoulders like they ached. "Ben's been trouble since spring. I should have dealt with it sooner." "Why haven't you?" "Because good hands are hard to find, and for all his faults, he knows cattle." Rowan looked tired. "But I'm running out of patience." That night at supper, Ben didn't show. The other three men ate quickly and left without lingering. Eleanor and Rowan cleaned up in silence. "He'll leave," Rowan said finally, "or I'll have to let him go. Either way, we'll be short a hand before fall." "Can you manage with 3? "If I have to." He dried the last plate and set it aside. "I've done more with less." Eleanor wanted to say something comforting, but she didn't know what. So instead she asked, "Do you ever regret it? Buying this place?" "Every day." He said it without hesitation. "But I'd regret not trying more." That's a strange way to look at it. Maybe. But regret's just part of it. You do the work anyway. Later, in her room, Eleanor thought about that. Do the work anyway. It was the closest thing to a philosophy she'd heard from him. No grand speeches about destiny or purpose. Just work. Just showing up and doing what needed to be done, even when it hurt. She could understand that. Ben was gone by morning, took his gear, and left without a word. Rowan found out when he went to wake the crew and found Ben's bunk empty. "Good riddance," Curtis muttered, but losing a hand meant everyone else had to work harder. Eleanor found herself taking on more, helping with fence repairs, feeding the horses, even riding out with lunch because nobody had time to come back for it. Her hands developed new calluses. Her shoulders got stronger. She stopped noticing the ache because it was just always there. 3 weeks after Ben left, Eleanor was in the barn putting away tack when she heard hoofbeats. She looked out to see a rider approaching, a woman, sitting side saddle on a pretty bay mare. As she got closer, Eleanor could see she was maybe 30, well-dressed in a way that marked her as someone from town. The woman dismounted near the house and looked around like she was evaluating property. Eleanor walked over, wiping dust from her hands. "Can I help you?" The woman turned, and her expression shifted to poorly concealed surprise. "Oh, Sam, you must be the housekeeper." "Eleanor Hale." "Victoria Webb." She said the name like it should mean something. "I'm Joseph Webb's sister." Eleanor's stomach went cold. "I see." "I wanted to come apologize for my brother's behavior. What he did to you was unconscionable." Victoria's tone was polite, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. "I hope you found suitable employment." "I have. Here." Victoria glanced at the house, the barn, the dusty yard. "With Rowan Creed?" "Yes." "Well." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I suppose beggars can't be choosers." The insult was delivered so smoothly that Eleanor almost missed it. Almost. "Was there something else you needed?" Eleanor asked. "Actually, yes. I'm organizing a harvest social in town next month. I wanted to extend an invitation to Mr. Creed. Is he available?" "He's working. I can give him the message." "That would be lovely." Victoria produced a cream-colored envelope from her bag. Please make sure he gets this. It's quite important. Eleanor took the envelope. Victoria mounted her horse with practiced grace, then looked down at Eleanor. You know, it's such a shame about you and Joseph, but I think things worked out for the best, don't you? You seem much better suited to this kind of life. She rode away before Eleanor could respond. Eleanor stood there holding the envelope, anger burning hot in her chest. Better suited to this kind of life. As if Eleanor was too rough, too common for anything else. As if working with her hands made her less than. She was still angry when Rowan came in for supper. She slapped the envelope down on the table harder than necessary. Victoria Webb brought this. Said it's important. Rowan picked it up, frowning. What did she want? To invite you to some social, and to remind me that I'm not good enough for her brother. She said that? Not in so many words, but yes. Rowan opened the envelope and scanned the contents. Then he tore it in half and tossed it in the stove. You're not going? Eleanor asked. Hell no, I don't go to those things. She seemed to think you would. Victoria Webb thinks a lot of things. Most of them are wrong. He sat down at the table. She used to come out here sometimes. Before. Thought she could convince me to marry her. What? She's been looking for a husband for 5 years, decided I'd do. Rowan's expression was grim. I told her I wasn't interested. She didn't take it well. So she came here to see you, to make sure you knew your place. He looked at Eleanor directly. Don't let her get in your head. Victoria's the kind of person who needs to feel superior to everyone around her. It's got nothing to do with you. But it did, Eleanor thought. It had everything to do with her, with the fact that she'd been rejected and discarded and now worked as a housekeeper in the middle of nowhere. Victoria had come to confirm that Eleanor had ended up exactly where someone like her belonged. I hate her, Eleanor said quietly. That's fair. Rowan stood and went to the stove. But don't let hate live in your head rent-free. She's not worth it. Eleanor watched him ladle out stew. This man who'd taken her in without judgment and torn up an invitation rather than pretend to be someone he wasn't. The anger started to fade, replaced by something else, something she didn't have a name for yet. Thank you, she said. For what? For not going, for not caring what people like her think. Rowan set a bowl in front of her. I stopped caring what people think a long time ago. Life got a lot simpler after that. The next few weeks slipped by in a pattern of work and weather and small moments that started to add up to something. Eleanor learned that Rowan took his coffee black, couldn't stand beans but would eat them anyway, and had a habit of standing on the porch at sunset, looking out at the valley like he was checking to make sure it was still there. She learned that Danny was saving money to buy his own place someday. That Jack had a daughter in Denver he hadn't seen in 3 years. That Curtis had been a school teacher once but couldn't stand being indoors. She learned the rhythm of the ranch, the way the work changed with the season. They brought in hay for winter, moved cattle to lower pastures, fixed equipment that would be needed come spring. And somewhere in all of that, Eleanor stopped thinking of the ranch as temporary, stopped planning her exit. This place, with its hard work and long silences and rough edges, had become something like home. One night in late September, she and Rowan were sitting on the newly fixed porch, watching stars come out. The air had turned cool, promising frost before long. Do you ever think about leaving? Eleanor asked. Sometimes, when things get hard. He leaned back against the post. But then I think about where I'd go, and I can't picture it. This is it for me. For better or worse. That doesn't scare you? It used to, now it just is. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter. I used to think I'd end up a governess somewhere. Or maybe a companion to some old woman. Small life, small room, small everything. That was the best I could hope for. And now? Now I don't know. This isn't what I expected, but it's not small. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, you're good at this, running the place. Better than I thought anyone would be. Is that a compliment? It's a fact. But yeah, it's a compliment too. Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the shawl. I like it here. I didn't expect to, but I do. Good, Rowan said. Because I'd like you to stay. The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor's heart did something complicated. As a housekeeper, she said carefully. Yeah, for now. For now. What did that mean? Eleanor wanted to ask, but she was afraid of the answer. Afraid it would be too much or not enough, or some other thing she couldn't handle. I'll stay, she said instead, as long as you need me. Good. They sat there until the cold drove them inside. Eleanor went to bed with her mind spinning, trying to make sense of the conversation. As long as you need me. For now. Small words that felt like they meant more than they should. She fell asleep thinking about Rowan's hands on the porch railing, scarred and capable. About the way he looked at the valley like it was something precious. About the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where being too much was exactly enough. The first frost came early in October, turning the grass silver and brittle. Eleanor woke to find ice in the water bucket and her breath misting in the cold air. Downstairs, Rowan had already started a fire in the stove. Winter's coming, he said, earlier than usual. They spent the day preparing, bringing in extra firewood, checking the barn for drafts, making sure the animals had shelter. By evening, Eleanor was exhausted but satisfied. They were ready. Whatever came, they'd handle it. At supper, Jack cleared his throat. Boss, I need to talk to you about something. Rowan looked up. What's on your mind? I'm going to have to leave come spring. My daughter in Denver, she's having trouble. Her husband left and she's got 2 kids to raise alone. She needs help. I understand, Rowan said. That's family. You do what you need to do. Jack nodded, looking relieved. I'll stay through winter, help with calving, but after that you take care of your daughter. After Jack left, Rowan sat at the table with his head in his hands. That makes 2 hands short, Eleanor said quietly. I know. Can you manage? I don't have a choice. He looked up at her. But yeah, somehow. I always do. Eleanor wanted to tell him he didn't have to do it alone, that she could help more, do more. But she didn't know how to say it without it sounding like something it wasn't. So instead, she just refilled his coffee and sat down across from him, keeping him company in the silence. Sometimes, she was learning, that was enough. Winter arrived in full force 2 weeks later. Snow fell for 3 days straight, burying the valley under 2 feet of white. The temperature dropped so low that water froze in the pipes, and Eleanor had to haul buckets from the well twice a day just to keep the household running. The work became brutal in ways she hadn't anticipated. Feeding animals in freezing wind, breaking ice on troughs, keeping fires going around the clock. But the house itself had changed. Eleanor had spent months cleaning, repairing, making it livable. Now, with the windows sealed against drafts and the stove burning steady, it felt almost warm. Almost like something more than just a building. The crew spent more time inside during the worst of the storms. Eleanor would find them in the kitchen after supper, nursing coffee and playing cards, their voices a low rumble that filled the empty spaces. Rowan usually sat apart, working on tack or reading supply catalogs, but he was there, present in a way he hadn't been before. One night, Danny asked Eleanor where she'd learned to cook. My aunt, she said, kneading bread dough. She ran a boarding house in Boston. I helped in the kitchen from the time I was 12. Why'd you leave? Curtis asked. Eleanor considered lying, then decided she was tired of it. Because there was nothing for me there. My aunts made it clear I was a burden. When the chance came to head west, I took it. To marry Joseph Webb, Jack said. It wasn't a question. Yes. His loss, Danny said with the certainty of youth. Eleanor smiled despite herself. That's kind of you to say. It's true. Webb's an idiot. Everyone knows it. Danny, Rowan said from his corner, leave it alone. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying, and you're right. But Miss Hale doesn't need us rehashing it. The room went quiet. Eleanor shaped the dough into loaves and set them to rise, aware that all of them were watching her now. She'd become part of their landscape, she realized. Not just the housekeeper, but something more, someone they made space for. It's all right, she said. I don't mind talking about it. What happened with Webb was humiliating, but it brought me here. And here isn't so bad. High praise, Rowan said dryly. Don't let it go to your head. Curtis laughed and the tension broke. They went back to their card game and Eleanor went back to her bread, and the evening settled into something comfortable. Later, after the others had gone to bed, Rowan helped her bank the fire for the night. You didn't have to defend me, Eleanor said. I know, but Danny's young. He doesn't understand when to let things be. He was trying to be kind. Kindness without sense is just noise. Rowan added another log to the stove. Besides, I wasn't defending you. I was ending a conversation that didn't need to happen. Eleanor studied him in the firelight. You don't like talking about personal things. No, I don't. Why? He was quiet for a long moment. Because talking doesn't change anything. What's done is done. Dwelling on it just makes it worse. That's a lonely way to live. Maybe, but it's my way. Eleanor wanted to push, to ask what had made him like this, but she recognized the wall when she saw it. Rowan had his boundaries, and she'd learned to respect them. Good night, she said instead. Night, Eleanor. She climbed the stairs to her room, thinking about walls and boundaries and the way people built them to keep from getting hurt. She understood that better than she wanted to admit. The snow kept falling. By Christmas week, they were running low on supplies. Rowan decided to make a trip to town, and Eleanor volunteered to go with him. It's a hard drive in this weather, he warned. I know, but I need to check on Mary, and I'm going stir-crazy cooped up here. All right, we'll leave at dawn. The trip took twice as long as it should have. The road was buried under snow, and the horses struggled through drifts that came up to their knees. Eleanor's feet went numb despite her boots, and her face ached from the cold. But when they finally reached Cedar Ridge, she felt something loosen in her chest. She hadn't realized how isolated she'd been until she saw other people, other buildings, signs of life beyond the ranch. Rowan dropped her at the boarding house and went to handle the supply run. Mrs. Garvey answered the door, looking older than Eleanor remembered. Eleanor Hale. Didn't think I'd see you again. Is Mary here? Upstairs, room 4 now. Thomas got too big for the small room. Eleanor climbed the stairs and knocked. Mary opened the door with Thomas on her hip, and her face lit up. Eleanor, I thought you'd forgotten about us. Never. Can I come in? Mary's new room was slightly larger, but just as sparse. Thomas had grown. He was walking now, toddling around and getting into everything. Mary looked tired, but better than she had in summer, more settled somehow. How have you been? Eleanor asked. Better. I'm working at the restaurant now. Mrs. Chen hired me to help with cooking and washing up. It's not much, but it's steady. Mary bounced Thomas on her knee. What about you? Still at the Creed Ranch? Yes. How is it? Really? Eleanor considered the question. Hard. Lonely sometimes, but good. I'm good. Mary searched her face. You look different. Different how? Stronger, like you've stopped apologizing for taking up space. Eleanor laughed. Maybe I have. Working with my hands will do that. Is it just work, nothing else? The question caught Eleanor off guard. What do you mean? I mean Rowan Creed is a good man, and you're living under his roof. People talk. Let them talk. There's nothing happening. But you want there to be. Eleanor opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. I don't know what I want. He's my employer, that's all. Eleanor, Mary leaned forward, I've known you for 6 months. You're a terrible liar. Even if I did want something, it wouldn't matter. He's not interested in me that way. How do you know? Because he would have said something, done something. Mary shook her head. Men like Rowan don't say things. They show them. Has he been kind to you? Yes. Respectful? Always. Does he make time to be around you, even when he doesn't have to? Eleanor thought about the nights on the porch, the way he helped with dishes, the quiet conversations over coffee. Yes. Then he's interested. He's just careful about it. Or he's just a decent person who treats his employees well. Maybe. But I don't think so. Mary shifted Thomas to her other hip. Just don't close yourself off to it. You deserve to be wanted, Eleanor. Not just useful. Wanted. The word stuck with Eleanor all through the supply run, all through the long, cold drive back to the ranch. She found herself watching Rowan from the corner of her eye, trying to see what Mary had seen. But he was the same as always, quiet, focused, impossible to read. They arrived after dark, both of them frozen and exhausted. Eleanor went straight to the kitchen to make coffee while Rowan unloaded supplies. When he came in, snow dusting his shoulders, she handed him a cup without speaking. Thank you. He wrapped his hands around it, thawing. How was Mary? Good. She's working at a restaurant now. That's good. She needed steady work. They stood there in the kitchen, drinking coffee, not quite looking at each other. Eleanor wanted to ask him what Mary had asked her. Wanted to know if there was something more than just employer and employee between them. But the words wouldn't come. "I should get to bed," she said finally. "Yeah, me too." But neither of them moved. The moment stretched out, fragile and weighted with things unsaid. Then Rowan set down his cup and walked away, and Eleanor was left standing alone in the kitchen, wondering what she'd just let slip through her fingers. January brought a cold snap that killed 3 head of cattle and nearly froze Curtis when he got caught in a storm checking fence lines. They found him 2 hours later, delirious and hypothermic, and Eleanor spent the night forcing warm broth down his throat and piling blankets on him until his shaking finally stopped. "You saved his life," Danny said the next morning. "I just kept him warm." That's what saved him. Curtis recovered, but the incident left everyone shaken. The ranch felt more dangerous now, more willing to kill. They started moving in pairs, never going out alone. Eleanor worried constantly, counting heads at mealtimes, relaxing only when everyone was accounted for. One night in late January, she woke to find Rowan standing in her doorway. "Get dressed," he said. "Quick!" Her heart jumped. "What's wrong?" "Barn's on fire." She was out of bed and pulling on clothes before he'd finished speaking. Outside, the night was lit orange. Flames poured from the barn's east side, and she could hear the horses screaming. The crew was already there, hauling water, trying to get the animals out. Eleanor ran to help, her lungs burning from smoke and cold. Danny led 2 horses past her, their eyes rolling white with fear. Jack was shouting something she couldn't hear over the roar of the fire. "The tack room!" Rowan yelled. "We need to cut it off before it reaches the hay." Eleanor grabbed a bucket and joined the line, throwing water that seemed to evaporate before it touched the flames. Her arms ached, her eyes streamed, but she kept going, driven by the same desperate need that kept everyone else moving. It took 2 hours to get it under control. By then, the east side of the barn was gone, collapsed into smoking ruin. But they'd saved the rest. The horses were safe. The hay was safe. They'd lost equipment and tack and part of the structure, but they'd kept the worst from happening. Eleanor sat in the snow, too exhausted to stand. Around her, the others were doing the same. Jack was coughing, his face black with soot. Danny had burned his hands on a hot beam. Curtis just stared at the wreckage like he couldn't quite believe it. Rowan walked the perimeter one more time, checking for hot spots. Then he came and sat next to Eleanor. "You all right?" he asked. "Ask me tomorrow." "Fair enough." He looked at the barn, his expression unreadable. "We'll have to rebuild. Can't work without a barn." "How?" "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out." Eleanor wanted to cry. For the barn, for the animals that had been so terrified, for the sheer exhaustion of fighting something that wanted to destroy everything they'd built. But tears seemed pointless, so she just sat there in the snow next to Rowan, both of them too tired to move. "Come on," he said finally. "Let's get inside before we freeze." They stumbled back to the house like a group of survivors from some kind of war. Eleanor heated water for washing while the men peeled off their ruined clothes. She found clean shirts, old blankets, anything to replace what had been destroyed. Then she made coffee and toast because it was all she had energy for. Nobody spoke. They just sat around the kitchen table drinking coffee, trying to process what had almost happened. "How did it start?" Curtis asked eventually. "Lantern, probably," Rowan said. "Someone didn't put it out all the way." "That was me." Danny's voice was small. "I was out there before bed checking on the roan. I thought I put it out, but—" "It was an accident," Rowan interrupted. "Could have happened to anyone." "But it was me. I burned down the barn." "You made a mistake. We all make them. What matters now is we rebuild." Danny looked like he wanted to argue, but Jack put a hand on his shoulder. "Boss is right. It's done. We move forward." They finished their coffee in silence. One by one, the men went to find places to sleep, the floor, the couch, anywhere they could collapse. Eleanor stayed in the kitchen, scrubbing soot from cups that didn't really need scrubbing. Rowan found her there an hour later. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." "I will, after I make sure nothing else is on fire." Eleanor set down the cup she'd been washing. "We almost lost everything tonight. But we didn't. We could have, if the fire had spread faster, if we hadn't woken up when we did. But we did wake up, and we fought it, and we won." He leaned against the counter. You can't live your life thinking about what almost happened. You'll drive yourself crazy. Is that what you do? Just not think about it? I think about it. Then I figure out what to do next. That's all any of us can do. Eleanor studied him, this man who faced near disaster with the same calm he brought to everything else. Don't you ever get scared? All the time, but being scared doesn't change anything, so I work through it. That's not healthy. Probably not, but it keeps me moving. He pushed off the counter and headed for the door. Eleanor caught his arm without thinking. Rowan, wait. He stopped, looking down at where her hand gripped his sleeve. She should let go. She knew she should, but instead she held on tighter. Thank you, she said. For everything, for giving me this job, for treating me like I matter, for not giving up when things got hard. I know I don't say it enough, but I'm grateful. Something shifted in his expression. You matter, Eleanor, more than you know. What does that mean? He looked at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. For a moment she thought he might actually answer, might say something real and true that would change everything between them. Instead, he gently pulled free. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He left before she could respond. Eleanor stood alone in the kitchen, her hand still raised where it had held him, wondering why she felt like she'd just lost something she'd never actually had. The next week was a blur of cleanup and planning. They salvaged what they could from the barn and made temporary shelters for the animals. Rowan spent hours with paper and pencil, sketching plans for a new structure. The cost would be enormous, money they didn't really have. I'll have to take out a loan, he told Eleanor one night. No way around it. How much? More than I want to think about. But we need a barn. Can't run a ranch without one. Eleanor thought about the account books she'd been organizing. They were in better shape than when she'd arrived, but there wasn't much margin for error. A bad year could wipe them out. What if we can't pay it back, she asked. Then we lose the ranch. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was talking about the weather. But Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. We won't lose it, she said. You don't know that. No, but I believe it anyway. Rowan looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in days. Why? Because we've survived everything else. The fire, the cold, losing hands. We'll survive this too. That's not logic, that's hope. Is there a difference? He almost smiled. Yeah. Logic makes sense, hope's just stubborn. Then I'm stubborn, so are you. Can't argue with that. They started rebuilding in early February. It was backbreaking work in brutal conditions, digging post holes in frozen ground, hauling timber and snow that never seemed to stop falling. But slowly, the frame went up. Walls took shape. The roof came together. Eleanor worked alongside the men, doing whatever needed doing. She'd stopped thinking of herself as just the housekeeper somewhere along the way. She was part of this place now, invested in its survival as much as anyone. One afternoon, she was helping Rowan lift a beam into place when her foot slipped on ice. She went down hard, the beam crashing beside her, missing her head by inches. Rowan was there instantly, pulling her up, his hands on her shoulders. Are you hurt? I'm fine, just startled. You could have been killed. But I wasn't. He didn't let go. They stood there in the snow, his hand still gripping her shoulders, both of them breathing hard. Eleanor could see something in his eyes, fear, maybe, or anger, or something else entirely. You need to be more careful, he said. I am careful. Not careful enough. If that beam had hit you, he stopped, his jaw working. It didn't. But it could have. Eleanor reached up and put her hand over his. Rowan, I'm all right. He looked down at where her hand covered his. Then, slowly, he pulled away and went back to work without another word. That night, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her, the fear in his eyes, the way his hands had trembled when he'd pulled her up. It meant something. She was sure of it. But what? She found him on the porch after supper, staring out at the half-finished barn. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. Why did you really hire me? I told you, I needed help. That's not all of it, though, is it? Rowan was quiet for a long time. No, he admitted finally, it's not. Then what's the rest? He turned to face her. In the fading light, his eyes looked darker, older. I hired you because I saw someone who'd been thrown away and decided to fight back. Someone who could have given up but didn't. I respected that. I still do. That's it? Respect? What do you want me to say, Eleanor? I want you to tell me the truth. All of it. The truth. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The truth is, I've spent 10 years alone because it was safer that way. Easier. And then you showed up, and suddenly everything I'd convinced myself I didn't need started looking like maybe I did need it after all. That's the truth. Happy now? Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it. Are you saying? I'm saying I care about you more than I should, more than is smart. He looked away. But I'm also your employer. You work for me. I won't take advantage of that. What if I want you to? The words were out before she could stop them. Rowan stared at her like she'd just spoken a foreign language. Eleanor, I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting. I know my own mind, and I know what I want. What do you want? She stepped closer. I want to stop pretending there's nothing between us. I want to stop lying to myself about why I'm still here. I want... He kissed her. It wasn't gentle or romantic or any of the things she'd read about in books. It was desperate and clumsy and perfect. His hands came up to cup her face, and she grabbed onto his coat like she was drowning, and he was the only solid thing in the world. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. That was, Eleanor started. A mistake, Rowan finished. I shouldn't have. Don't you dare apologize. Eleanor, this isn't. I can't. Yes, you can. We both can. She held onto his coat tighter. Unless you didn't mean it. Unless this was just. I meant it. His voice was rough. I've meant it for months, but it doesn't change the facts. You work for me. If this goes wrong, then it goes wrong. But what if it doesn't? Rowan looked at her like she was offering him something precious and terrifying. I don't know how to do this. I haven't. It's been a long time. Then we'll figure it out together. He kissed her again, slower this time, more certain. And Eleanor felt something inside her chest crack open, letting in light she didn't know she'd been missing. When they finally went inside, everything had changed and nothing had. They were still Eleanor and Rowan, still the housekeeper and the rancher, but now they were something else too, something neither of them had words for yet. That night, lying in her bed, Eleanor thought about the path that had brought her here, the rejection that had felt like an ending, the desperate trip west, the telegram that had shattered everything. If Joseph Webb hadn't rejected her, she never would have found this place, this life, this man who saw her strength as something valuable instead of something wrong. Maybe, she thought, some endings were just beginnings in disguise. Maybe being unwanted by the wrong person was just fate clearing the path to the right one. She fell asleep smiling, the memory of Rowan's kiss still warm on her lips. Morning came too bright and too cold. Eleanor woke with her heart already racing, the memory of last night making everything feel different. She dressed quickly, fingers fumbling with buttons, and went downstairs expecting everything to have changed. But the kitchen looked exactly the same. Rowan was already there, making coffee like he did every morning. He glanced up when she entered, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Morning, he said. Morning. The word hung between them, weighted with everything they weren't saying. Eleanor busied herself with the stove, hyper-aware of where he was standing, how close, the space between them that felt both too much and not enough. Eleanor. She turned. Rowan was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. About last night, he started. Her stomach dropped. If you're going to tell me it was a mistake, I was going to say we should probably talk about it. Oh, but not here. Not with the crew about to come down for breakfast. He poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. Tonight, after everyone's asleep. All right. They managed to get through breakfast without the others noticing anything strange, though Eleanor caught Danny giving them curious looks. The day passed in a fog of normal work, cooking, cleaning, helping where she could with the barn reconstruction. But underneath it all, she felt like she was waiting for something. A confirmation or a rejection, some sign of what came next. Rowan was different too. She caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. Once, their hands brushed reaching for the same tool, and the contact felt electric. He pulled back like he'd been burned. Sorry, he muttered. Don't be. That night, after the crew had gone to bed, Eleanor found Rowan on the porch. He'd built up the fire in the outdoor pit they use sometimes, and the flames cast dancing shadows across his face. You came, he said. You asked me to. I wasn't sure you would. Eleanor sat down on the bench beside him. Rowan, if you're having second thoughts, I'm not. That's the problem. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've been alone for so long, by choice, and then you showed up and made me want things I'd convinced myself I didn't need. What kind of things? Partnership, companionship, someone to talk to at the end of the day who actually gives a damn. He looked at her. You. Eleanor's throat went tight. I want those things too. With you. Even though I'm difficult and closed off and probably too set in my ways to change? Even though... Eleanor, I don't know how to be in a relationship. The last time I tried, it ended badly. Really badly. This was the wall she'd sensed in him before. The thing that made him hold back. What happened? Rowan was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. Her name was Sarah. We were engaged. This was 12 years ago back in Missouri. I was working on her father's ranch, saving money to buy my own place. We had plans, a future. He paused. Then her father found out I didn't have family money, that I was just a hired hand with ideas above my station. He told her she could do better. And she believed him? She chose him. Broke it off 3 days before the wedding. Married a banker's son 6 months later. His voice was flat, emotionless. I left Missouri and came out here. Started over. Told myself I'd never be in that position again, wanting someone who could walk away that easy. Eleanor reached for his hand. I'm not Sarah. I know, but that doesn't make it less scary. It scares me too. I've never done this before. Never been wanted. She squeezed his fingers. But I'm tired of being afraid, tired of letting fear decide everything. Rowan turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. So what do? We try. We see what happens, and if it doesn't work... She stopped, not wanting to finish the sentence. If it doesn't work, we deal with it. But Eleanor, if we do this, it changes things. You won't just be my housekeeper anymore. What will I be? I don't know yet, but something more. Something that matters. They sat there holding hands, watching the fire burn down to embers. It wasn't a grand declaration or a promise of forever. It was just two damaged people deciding to try anyway. Maybe that was enough. The next few weeks were strange and awkward and wonderful all at once. They didn't tell the crew. There didn't seem to be a way to explain it that wouldn't make things complicated, so they kept it quiet. Stolen moments, conversations that went longer than they needed to, small touches when no one was looking. Eleanor had never been courted before. Didn't know the rules or expectations. Rowan was just as lost. Sometimes she'd catch him looking at her with an expression of complete bewilderment, like he couldn't quite believe this was happening. One night, he brought her wildflowers he'd found growing near the creek. They were half frozen and scraggly, but Eleanor put them in a jar on the kitchen windowsill and looked at them every morning like they were something precious. They're just weeds, Rowan said, embarrassed. They're perfect. Another time, she mended a tear in his coat and found a small carved wooden bird in the pocket later. When she asked him about it, he shrugged. Found it in town years ago. Thought you might like it. She kept it on her dresser next to the flowers. They were learning each other. The way he took his coffee, the way she hummed when she was concentrating, the fact that he couldn't sleep during storms and she was terrified of spiders. Small details that added up to something bigger. But the ranch work didn't stop for romance. The barn reconstruction was eating through money faster than they'd planned. Rowan went to the bank in town and came back with the loan papers, his face grim. 5 years to pay it back, he said. If we can't make the payments, they take the ranch. Eleanor looked at the numbers. They were brutal. We'll make it work. You keep saying that. Because I believe it. Your faith in me is terrifying. Good. You should be terrified. Keeps you sharp. He laughed despite himself, and Eleanor felt something warm settle in her chest. This was what she'd been missing her whole life. Not grand gestures or poetry, but this. Someone who laughed at her stubbornness and valued her strength and didn't try to make her smaller to fit. In March, Jack's daughter wrote saying she needed him sooner than planned. He left 2 weeks later, apologizing profusely, promising to come back if he could. Eleanor knew he wouldn't. Denver had his family. The ranch was just a job. "Down to 3 hands," Rowan said after Jack left. "4 if you count me." "3 if you count me," Eleanor corrected. "You're not a ranch hand." "I am now. We don't have a choice." She started working alongside Curtis and Danny, doing whatever needed doing. Mending fence, moving cattle, breaking ice on water troughs. The work was brutal, but she was stronger now than she'd been when she arrived. Her body had adapted. Her hands were covered in calluses, her shoulders broad with muscle. One day she caught sight of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. This wasn't the anxious, apologetic person who'd stepped off the stagecoach in Cedar Ridge. This was someone harder, someone who'd earned her place. In April, Victoria Webb showed up again. Eleanor was in the garden, trying to coax life out of soil that seemed determined to stay frozen when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up to see Victoria dismounting near the house, dressed in riding clothes that probably cost more than Eleanor made in 6 months. "Miss Hale," Victoria said, her smile sharp. "Still here, I see." "Mrs. Webb, what can I do for you?" "I'm looking for Mr. Creed. Is he available?" "He's working, north pasture." "I'll wait then." Victoria glanced at the garden. "Trying to grow vegetables? In this soil? How ambitious." Eleanor bit back her first response. "Is there something specific you need, or are you just here to criticize my gardening?" Victoria's smile widened. "Direct. I like that. Actually, I came to make Mr. Creed an offer. My brother is interested in purchasing the northern section of his property, the part along the creek. We'd pay fair market value." "Why would Joseph want that land?" "Water rights. It's valuable." Victoria examined her gloves. "I heard about the fire. And the loan. I imagine Mr. Creed could use the money." Eleanor stood up, brushing dirt from her hands. "You should discuss this with him directly." "I plan to, but I wanted you to know this could solve a lot of problems for him. Financial problems. The kind that could save the ranch. Or you're trying to take advantage of a bad situation." Such cynicism. Victoria tilted her head. "You've changed, Miss Hale. When you first arrived, you were so eager to please, so desperate to belong. Now you're—" "I'm what?" "Confident. It's interesting." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Almost like you think you have a claim to this place. To him." Eleanor felt her face heat. "I work here." "Of course you do. Just work." Victoria smiled like she knew a secret. "Well, I'll wait for Mr. Creed in the house. I'm sure you don't mind." She walked away before Eleanor could respond. Eleanor stood there in the garden, hands clenched into fists, wanting to scream. When Rowan came in an hour later, Victoria was sitting in the kitchen like she owned the place. Eleanor was conspicuously absent. She'd retreated to the barn, not trusting herself to be civil. She heard them talking through the open window. Victoria's voice, smooth and persuasive. Rowan's shorter, careful. She couldn't make out the words, but she heard Victoria laugh, heard the front door close, the sound of hoofbeats fading. Rowan found her in the barn, mucking out stalls. "She told me you already know," he said. "About the offer?" "Yes. It's a lot of money, Eleanor. Enough to pay off the loan and have capital left over." Eleanor's stomach sank. "You're going to sell—" "I'm thinking about it." He leaned against the stall door. "That land's not producing much. It's mostly scrub and creek bed. If I sold it, we'd be secure. No more worrying about making payments. We'd also be neighbors to Joseph Webb." "So?" "So he's the man who rejected me, who humiliated me, and now he gets to watch me work myself to death right next door?" Rowan frowned. "This isn't about him, isn't it? Victoria shows up here with this convenient offer right when we're struggling. You don't think that's calculated?" "I think it's business. It's more than business, and you know it." Eleanor threw down her pitchfork. "She's trying to get a foothold here, and once Joseph has that land, he'll want more. That's how it works with people like them. They take and take until there's nothing left." "You're being paranoid." "I'm being realistic, but you do what you want. It's your ranch." She walked out before he could respond. It was petty and childish, but she couldn't help it. The thought of Joseph Webb owning part of this place, of seeing him when she went to town, of knowing he'd gotten exactly what he wanted while she worked herself raw. It made her want to break things. That night, Rowan didn't come to the house for supper. Danny and Curtis ate in awkward silence, clearly sensing the tension. Eleanor cleaned up alone, slamming dishes harder than necessary. She was in bed when she heard footsteps on the stairs, a soft knock on her door. "Eleanor, can I come in?" She considered pretending to be asleep, then sat up. "It's your house." Rowan entered, closing the door behind him. They'd been careful about propriety. He'd never been in her room before. It felt transgressive and intimate all at once. "I'm not selling," he said. "What changed your mind?" You did. You were right. It's not just business. And I don't want Joseph Webb anywhere near this place." He sat on the edge of her bed. "I'm sorry. I should have listened to you from the start." Eleanor felt the anger drain out of her. "I'm sorry too, for storming off like a child. You were upset. You're allowed to be upset. Still, I should have stayed and talked it through." They sat there in the dark, not quite touching. Finally, Rowan spoke. "Victoria said something before she left. Asked if you and I were involved." Eleanor's heart jumped. "What did you say?" "I told her it wasn't her business." He looked at her. "But it made me realize we can't keep this hidden forever. Eventually people are going to notice." "Does that bother you?" "No. Does it bother you?" Eleanor thought about Cedar Ridge, about the whispers and judgment that would follow, about Victoria's knowing smile and Joseph's probable reaction. "Let them talk," she said. "I'm tired of hiding." Rowan reached for her hand. "Are you sure? Once it's out there, I'm sure." He kissed her then, soft and slow, and Eleanor felt the last of her defenses crumble. This man who'd seen her at her lowest and offered her a chance, who valued her strength instead of fearing it, who made her feel like being too much was exactly right. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "I should go," he said, "before I do something that would scandalize the crew." "Stay, just for a while." So he stayed, lying beside her on top of the covers, holding her hand in the dark. They talked about nothing and everything, plans for the ranch, memories from before, dreams for a future that was starting to feel possible. Eleanor fell asleep with his arm around her, feeling safer than she ever had in her life. She woke alone. Rowan had left sometime before dawn, careful not to wake her, but his coat was draped over her chair, and when she checked the pockets, she found another carved bird. This one had its wings spread like it was flying. The spring work intensified. Calving season meant sleepless nights and constant vigilance. Eleanor learned to assist with difficult births, to recognize when a calf was in distress, to do things she'd never imagined doing back in Boston. The work was messy and exhausting and strangely satisfying. One night, she and Rowan were in the barn helping a heifer with her first calf. The birth was going wrong. The calf was breech, and the heifer was panicking. "Hold her steady," Rowan said, reaching in. "I've almost got it. There." The calf came out in a rush, slick and motionless. Rowan cleared its airway and started rubbing it vigorously with straw. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the calf coughed and took a shaky breath. "There you go," Rowan murmured. "That's it. Breathe." Eleanor watched the heifer turn to her calf, licking it clean, and felt something catch in her throat. Life was so fragile out here, so easily lost. But when it persisted, when it fought through, it was beautiful. "You all right?" Rowan asked. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how different this is from anything I imagined, but how I wouldn't trade it." He smiled. "Even the parts where you're elbow deep in cow?" "Even those parts." They walked back to the house together, exhausted and filthy. The sky was starting to lighten. Another night gone, another day beginning. Eleanor looked at the valley spread out below them and felt something she'd never felt before. She felt like she was home. In May, they made their first trip to town together. It was time to buy supplies and pay the monthly installment on the loan. Eleanor dressed carefully, aware that this was the first time they'd appear in public since things had changed between them. They didn't hold hands or make any overt displays, but people noticed anyway. The way they stood closer than necessary. The way Rowan's hand rested on her back when they walked into the bank. The way Eleanor smiled at him over the counter at the general store. By the time they left town, the whispers had started. On the drive back, Rowan asked, "Do you regret it? Coming with me today?" "No? Why?" "Because now everyone knows." About us. Let them know. I'm not ashamed. Neither am I, but I know how this town talks. Eleanor thought about the looks they'd gotten. Mrs. Garvey's knowing smile. The bank clerk's poorly hidden surprise. And yes, Victoria Webb watching from across the street with an expression like she'd won something. They can talk all they want, Eleanor said. It doesn't change anything. But 2 days later, when they were in the north pasture, a rider came with a message. The bank wanted to see Rowan, immediately. He came back that evening looking grim. What happened? Eleanor asked. Someone's been spreading rumors saying the ranch is mismanaged, that I'm not fit to run it. He slammed his hat on the table. The bank's getting nervous. They want to see the books. Verify that we can make the payments. We can prove that. The accounts are in order. It's not about the accounts. It's about perception. If the bank thinks we're a bad risk, they can call the loan, take the ranch. Eleanor's hands went cold. Who would spread rumors like that? But she already knew. They both did. Victoria, Rowan said. Or Joseph. Or both. Why? Because I didn't sell them the land, because they want me to fail. He sat down heavily. Because they saw us together and decided to make it a problem. Eleanor felt rage building in her chest. So what do? We show them the books, prove we're solvent, and hope it's enough. It took 2 weeks to gather everything the bank wanted. Eleanor worked late into the nights, organizing receipts, balancing accounts, preparing documentation that showed the ranch was profitable. Rowan rode to town 3 times, meeting with bank officials, making his case. Finally, the bank agreed. The loan would stand. But the message was clear. They were being watched. One mistake, one missed payment, and it would all be over. We have to be perfect, Rowan said after the final meeting. No room for error. Then we'll be perfect. But perfection was exhausting. They pushed themselves harder, worked longer hours, took on more than they could reasonably handle. Eleanor started losing weight. Rowan developed a cough he couldn't shake. Curtis complained about the pace. Even Danny's usual optimism started to fade. One night in June, Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing supper when she just stopped. Her hands wouldn't move. Her body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Rowan found her there, standing motionless in front of the stove. Eleanor? I can't do this anymore. Can't do what? This. All of it. Trying to be perfect. Trying to prove we're worthy of keeping our own land. I'm so tired, Rowan. He pulled her into his arms. She sagged against him, too exhausted to hold herself up anymore. I know, he said quietly. I'm tired too. What if we can't do it? What if we lose everything anyway? Then we lose it, but at least we went down fighting. Eleanor pulled back to look at him. That's it? That's your plan? That's all I've got. We work as hard as we can, and we hope it's enough. And if it's not, he touched her face. We find something else, together. I don't want something else. I want this. So do I. But Eleanor, this ranch isn't worth killing ourselves over. If it costs us everything we are just to keep it, that's not winning. That's just a different kind of losing. She knew he was right, but knowing didn't make it easier. They called a meeting with Danny and Curtis the next morning, laid out the situation honestly, the financial pressure, the bank's scrutiny, the reality that they might not make it. We'll understand if you want to find other work, Rowan said. No hard feelings. Danny and Curtis exchanged looks. We're staying, Curtis said. You sure? The pay's not great, and the work is brutal. We're sure. This is our place too now. We're not leaving. Danny nodded. What he said. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. They weren't alone in this. They had help. They had people who cared. Maybe that would be enough. The summer passed in a blur of relentless work, but they paced themselves better. Took Sundays to actually rest. Started eating meals together instead of bolting food while working. Small changes that made the brutal pace more sustainable. In August, Eleanor discovered she'd gained back the weight she'd lost. Her hands were steadier. The exhaustion that had felt crushing in June had settled into something manageable. One evening, she and Rowan were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. He had his arm around her, and she was leaning into his warmth, feeling content in a way she'd never expected to feel. I've been thinking, Rowan said. About what? About making this official. Eleanor's heart jumped. What do you mean, official? I mean, I want to marry you. If you'll have me. She sat up to look at him properly. Are you serious? Dead serious. I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring this out. But Eleanor, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. You make everything better just by being here. And I don't want to spend another day pretending you're just my housekeeper when you're so much more than that. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. It's the only proposal you've ever heard. Fair point. She wiped her eyes. Yes. Yes? Yes. I'll marry you, you stubborn, difficult man. He kissed her, and Eleanor felt like she was flying. This was nothing like she'd imagined when she'd come west to marry Joseph Webb. This was real and complicated and built on months of shared struggle. This was earned. When they finally broke apart, Rowan was smiling wider than she'd ever seen. We'll do it right, he said. Small ceremony, just us and the crew, nothing fancy. I don't need fancy, I just need you. They married 3 weeks later in the valley, with Danny and Curtis as witnesses and a traveling preacher who asked no questions. Eleanor wore her best dress, and Rowan wore a clean shirt, and they promised to stick together through whatever came next. It wasn't the fairy tale Eleanor had once dreamed of. It was better. Because it was real. The morning after the wedding, Eleanor woke in Rowan's arms in what was now their shared bedroom. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to feel chosen. Not settled for. Not accepted, despite flaws. Chosen. You're thinking too loud, Rowan murmured against her hair. How do you know I'm thinking? You get this line between your eyebrows. He traced it with his finger. What's going on in that head? I'm just happy. Is that allowed? It's required. He kissed her forehead. But we should probably get up before Danny comes looking for us. He's been giving me looks ever since we told him. What kind of looks? The kind that say he's wondering if the boss has lost his mind. Eleanor laughed and pushed him toward the edge of the bed. Go. I'll be down in a minute. But happiness, Eleanor learned quickly, didn't solve practical problems. The ranch still needed constant work. The bank still watched them like hawks. And in September, a drought hit that threatened to destroy everything they'd built. The creek that ran through the property slowed to a trickle. The pastures turned brown and brittle. Cattle started losing weight because there wasn't enough grass. Every morning, Eleanor would check the sky for rain clouds and find nothing but endless blue. We need to move the herd to higher pasture, Rowan said one night, studying maps by lamplight. The mountain grazing is still decent, but it means leaving them up there through early winter, which is a risk. What's the alternative? Sell half of them now at a loss. Use the money to feed the rest through winter. Eleanor looked at the numbers she'd been working on. If we sell now, we'll lose too much. We'd barely break even after paying the loan installment. If we don't sell and the drought continues, we could lose them all. They sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on both of them. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Move them up. It's a gamble, but at least we're betting on ourselves instead of giving up. You sure? No, but I'd rather fail trying than fail because we were too scared to try. They moved the cattle the next week, a brutal 3-day push-up narrow mountain trails. Eleanor rode alongside the men, helping keep the herd together, sleeping on the ground wrapped in blankets, waking with frost in her hair. By the time they got the last of the cattle settled in the high pasture, she was so exhausted she could barely stay in the saddle. You did good, Rowan said that night as they made camp one last time before heading back down. I hurt everywhere. That means you worked hard. That's not comforting. He smiled and pulled her close. We're going to make it through this. I know we are. How can you be so sure? Because we've made it through everything else. But when they got back to the ranch, there was a letter waiting. The bank was raising the interest rate on the loan. Something about increased risk in agricultural lending. The numbers made Eleanor's stomach drop. Their margins had been tight before. Now they were nearly impossible. They're trying to force us out, she said. Rowan read the letter twice, his expression darkening. They can't just change the terms like this. Apparently they can. It's in the fine print. If conditions change, they have the right to adjust rates. This is Victoria. This is her doing. Eleanor wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Victoria's family had connections at the bank. This had her fingerprints all over it. What do we do? She asked. We fight it. We get a lawyer. He stopped. We can't afford a lawyer. Then we do it ourselves. They spent 2 weeks preparing their case, gathering documentation, building arguments. Eleanor wrote letters to bank officials, pointing out their perfect payment history, their improving profits, the unfairness of changing terms mid-contract. Rowan made trips to town, trying to find someone who'd listen. In the end, the bank agreed to a compromise. They'd keep the original interest rate, but they wanted the loan paid off in 3 years instead of 5. It was still brutal, but it was better than the alternative. 3 years, Eleanor said after Rowan came back with the news. That means we need to increase revenue by almost 40%. I know. How? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. Eleanor looked at the numbers until they blurred. 40%. It felt impossible. But so had everything else, and they'd managed anyway. The solution came from an unexpected source. Curtis, who rarely spoke up about business matters, mentioned one night at supper that his brother in Wyoming was making good money selling horses to the cavalry. They're always looking for good stock, he said. Pay premium prices for horses that can handle rough country. Rowan looked up. We've got good breeding stock. The Roan's bloodline is solid. Could work, Curtis agreed. If we can build up a herd worth selling. They started the next week pulling together every spare dollar to buy 3 promising mares. It was a long-term investment. Horses took time to breed and train, but it was something. A path forward that didn't involve just working harder at what they were already doing. Eleanor threw herself into learning everything she could about horses. She read books Rowan had tucked away, talked to Curtis about training techniques, spent hours in the pasture watching how the animals moved and interacted. It was fascinating in a way the cattle never had been. Horses had personality, spirit. They reminded her of herself in a way, strong and stubborn and willing to work if treated right. One afternoon in October, she was in the corral working with a young mare when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up to see Joseph Webb riding toward the ranch. Her first instinct was to run and get Rowan. Her second was to stand her ground. She'd spent too long being afraid of this man, giving him power he didn't deserve. Joseph dismounted near the fence, looking uncomfortable. Up close, Eleanor realized he was smaller than she remembered. Not particularly handsome, just a man, average and unremarkable. Miss Hale, he started. Mrs. Creed, she corrected, his face flushed. I heard. Congratulations. What do you want, Joseph? I came to apologize for what I did, the way I treated you. It was wrong. Eleanor studied him, trying to figure out if he was sincere. What brought on this sudden attack of conscience? I've been thinking about it, about how I let Victoria influence me. She was the one who said you were too tall that people would talk. I should have made my own decision. He looked down at his hands. I should have given you a chance. Yes, you should have, but you didn't, and that's done now. I know. I just wanted you to know that I regret it. You seem happy here, happier than you would have been with me. Eleanor almost laughed. You're right about that. Creed's a good man, better than me, probably. Definitely better than you. Joseph winced but nodded. Well, I've said what I came to say. I'll leave you alone now. He started to turn, then stopped. My sister's planning something. I don't know what, but she's been talking to the bank, making trips to the county office. Just thought you should know. Why are you telling me this? Because I owe you, and because Victoria's gone too far. This isn't about business anymore. It's personal, and it's wrong. He left before Eleanor could respond. She stood there in the corral processing what had just happened. Joseph Webb had apologized, had warned them about Victoria. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it was something. That night she told Rowan about the visit. He's right about Victoria, Rowan said. She's planning something. I can feel it. What can we do? Stay alert. Keep our accounts perfect. Don't give her any ammunition. But 2 weeks later, the ammunition came anyway. A county assessor showed up, claiming there were irregularities in the ranch's property boundaries. He needed to conduct a survey, which would cost money and time they didn't have. This is harassment, Rowan told the man. This is the law, Mr. Creed. Someone filed a complaint. We have to investigate. The survey took 3 weeks and found nothing wrong. But it cost them $200 they couldn't afford and pulled Rowan away from work at a critical time. The cattle needed to be brought down from the mountains before the first big snow, but he was stuck dealing with bureaucrats and paperwork. Eleanor and Curtis made the trip instead, taking Danny with them. It was dangerous. The weather was already turning, and neither Eleanor nor Danny had the experience Rowan had with mountain driving. But they didn't have a choice. The cattle were scattered across 3 different valleys. Gathering them took 2 days of hard riding and increasingly bad weather. On the 3rd day, snow started falling. Not the light dusting they could handle, but heavy, wind-driven snow that cut visibility to almost nothing. "We need to get down," Curtis shouted over the wind. "Now!" They pushed the herd as hard as they dared, but the trail was treacherous with fresh snow covering ice. Eleanor's horse slipped twice, nearly going down. She could hear cattle bawling in distress, smell the fierce sweat of horses struggling in bad footing. Halfway down, Danny's horse stepped wrong. Eleanor heard the crack of bone breaking, saw the animal go down, saw Danny thrown clear but sliding toward a drop-off. She was off her own horse before thinking, grabbing for Danny's coat, pulling him back from the edge. Curtis reached them seconds later, helping haul Danny to safety. "My horse," Danny said, his voice cracking. "She's—" The horse was still down, trying to stand on a broken leg. Curtis pulled his rifle, and Eleanor turned Danny's face away before the shot rang out. They made it down as darkness fell, exhausted and half-frozen, with one less horse and a herd that was smaller than it should have been. Some of the cattle had scattered in the storm and were probably lost. Rowan was waiting at the ranch, his face tight with worry. When he saw Eleanor, he pulled her into his arms so hard she could barely breathe. "I thought I'd lost you," he said into her hair. "We're fine. Danny's bruised, Curtis is exhausted, but we're fine. Don't ever do that again." "We didn't have a choice." "I know. That's what scares me." That night, after everyone else was asleep, Eleanor and Rowan sat in the kitchen doing the accounting. The numbers were worse than she'd feared. The survey had cost them. Losing cattle had cost them. Losing a horse had cost them. They were behind on their loan payment for the first time since they'd taken it out. "We're not going to make it," Eleanor said quietly. "Don't say that. Rowan, look at the numbers. Even if everything goes perfectly from here on out, which it won't, we're going to be short. The bank's going to call the loan." He stared at the ledger like it had betrayed him. "There has to be something we can do. We could sell the horse breeding stock. That would give us enough for this payment. That's our future. Our way out of this cycle." "I know, but if we don't make this payment, we won't have a future to worry about." They sat in silence, the weight of failure pressing down on both of them. All the work, all the sacrifice, all the hope. It was slipping away. "No," Rowan said finally. "We're not selling. Not yet. Give me a week. Let me try something." "What?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." He left the next morning before dawn, riding toward town without telling Eleanor where he was going. She tried not to worry, tried to focus on work, but her mind kept spinning through worst-case scenarios. He came back 3 days later with a check for $500. "How did you—" Eleanor started. "I sold the timber rights to the north section, to a logging company out of Montana." Eleanor's heart sank. "Rowan, that timber's been on this land for generations." "I know, but it's just trees. We can plant more. We can't replace this ranch." "Who bought them? Please don't tell me it was Victoria. Independent company. I made sure of that. They'll come in next spring, take what they need, and replant. It's done right." Eleanor looked at the check. $500. Enough to make the payment and have a little left over. Enough to buy them time. "You should have talked to me first," she said. "Would you have agreed?" "No." "That's why I didn't ask." She should have been angry, should have argued that this was her ranch too now, that he couldn't make decisions like this alone. But looking at his face, exhausted, determined, scared underneath it all, she couldn't find the anger. "Thank you," she said instead. "For what?" "For fighting. For not giving up." "I'll never give up. Not on this place. Not on us." They made the payment with a week to spare. The bank accepted it without comment, but Eleanor could see the disappointment in the clerk's eyes. They'd been hoping for a default, for a chance to take the ranch, but they'd survived again. Winter came hard and mean. The snow piled so high that they couldn't see the fence lines. The cold was so brutal that water froze in buckets inside the house. They burned through firewood at an alarming rate, and Eleanor found herself rationing food because trips to town were too dangerous. Curtis got sick in January, a fever that turned into pneumonia. Eleanor nursed him for 2 weeks, forcing broth down his throat, bathing him in cool water when the fever spiked, sitting up all night when his breathing got too shallow. "He's gonna die," Danny said one night, his voice breaking. "No, he's not. I won't let him. You can't just will someone to live." "Watch me." Curtis pulled through, but it was close. Too close. When he was finally well enough to sit up and eat on his own, Rowan pulled Eleanor aside. "You saved his life," he said. "I just kept him alive long enough for his body to heal itself." That's what saving someone's life is. Eleanor thought about that later, about how survival was often just a matter of holding on long enough for things to get better, not giving up when it would be easier to quit, showing up every day and doing the work even when the work felt impossible. That's what they'd been doing for over a year now, just holding on, just surviving. But in March, something shifted. The logging company came and took the timber, leaving the land scarred but alive. They paid in full and left without incident. The money went straight to the next loan payment with some left over for supplies. The horse breeding program started paying off. 2 of the mares delivered healthy foals, and a cavalry buyer came through in April, interested in purchasing stock for the following year. He didn't commit, but he was impressed enough to come back. The cattle that had survived the winter were in good shape. The spring grass came in thick and green. The drought had broken, and the creek ran high with snowmelt. For the first time since the fire, Eleanor felt like they might actually make it. One night in May, she realized she'd missed her monthly bleeding. Then another month passed. By June, there was no doubt. She told Rowan on a warm evening, sitting on the porch watching the sun set. "I'm pregnant," she said, simple and direct. He went very still. "Are you sure?" "Very sure." "How do you feel about it?" Eleanor thought about the question. Terrified, excited, both at once. Rowan pulled her close. "We can do this. We can handle anything now." "Can we? A baby is expensive, time-consuming. What if something goes wrong?" "Then we deal with it. Together. Like we deal with everything else." Eleanor leaned into him, letting his certainty soothe her fears. They'd survived drought and fire and financial ruin. They'd survived Victoria's scheming and the bank's pressure and winter that tried to kill them. They could survive a baby. The pregnancy was hard. Eleanor was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down. Then the exhaustion hit, so profound that sometimes she'd fall asleep standing up. But she kept working, kept managing the house and the accounts and everything else that needed doing. "You should rest," Rowan kept saying. "I'll rest when the work is done." The work is never done. Exactly. By September, she was too pregnant to ride or do heavy lifting, which drove her crazy. She felt useless, stuck in the house while everyone else worked. But Rowan hired a woman from town, Mary, with her son Thomas, to help with cooking and cleaning. It was Eleanor's idea, a way to help her friend and solve their immediate problem at the same time. Mary arrived with Thomas, now a rambunctious 3-year-old, and immediately took over the kitchen like she'd always belonged there. "You did it," she told Eleanor one night after everyone else was asleep. "You made a life here, a real life." "We both did," Eleanor said. "You're working. Thomas is growing up safe. We're both fine." "Better than fine. You married a good man, you're having a baby, you've got a home." Eleanor looked around the kitchen, the same kitchen that had been a disaster when she'd first arrived. She'd cleaned it, organized it, made it function. She'd turned this broken-down house into a home. "I never thought I'd have this," she admitted. "All my life I was told I was too much, too tall, too strong, too everything. I thought the best I could hope for was to be tolerated. And now? Now I know I wasn't too much. I was just in the wrong place. Here, everything I am is exactly what's needed." The baby came in October during the first snow of the season. The labor was long and brutal, and there were moments when Eleanor thought she might die. But Mary was there, and a midwife from town, and Rowan holding her hand, and somehow she made it through. When the midwife placed the baby in her arms, a daughter, perfect and howling, Eleanor felt something crack open inside her chest. This tiny creature was hers and Rowan's. Proof that they'd built something that would outlast them. "She's beautiful," Rowan said, his voice rough with emotion. "She's angry," Eleanor corrected. "Listen to those lungs. She gets that from you." "Probably." They named her Sarah after Rowan's mother, and Eleanor watched this man who'd been so closed off, so careful with his heart, completely fall apart over his daughter. He'd hold her for hours, talking to her in a soft voice Eleanor had never heard before, looking at her like she was the most miraculous thing in the world. "You're good at this," Eleanor told him one night. "At what?" "Being a father, being soft." "I'm not soft." "You are with her. It's sweet." He kissed Eleanor's forehead. "She makes it easy. You both do." The next few years blurred together in a pattern of seasons and work and small victories. They paid off the bank loan in the full 5 years, not the accelerated 3 the bank had demanded. The horse breeding program became profitable enough to sustain them through bad cattle years. The ranch grew, acre by acre, as they bought out neighbors who couldn't make it. Sarah grew from a baby into a wild, fearless child who wanted to do everything the ranch hands did. By the time she was 4, she was following Danny around like a shadow, learning to rope and ride and work cattle. "She's going to be taller than me," Eleanor observed one day, watching Sarah try to climb onto a horse twice her size. "Probably," Rowan agreed. "Think that'll bother her?" "Not if we raise her right." In Sarah's 5th year, Eleanor got pregnant again. This time, it was twins, boys who came early and scared everyone, but ultimately thrived. They named them Jack and Curtis, after the men who'd helped build the ranch. With 3 children and a growing operation, they needed more help. They hired 2 more hands and built a proper bunkhouse. They expanded the barn, rebuilt the porch again, added rooms to the house. The ranch that had been failing when Eleanor arrived was now one of the most successful in the territory. People came from other counties to buy their horses. Their cattle brought premium prices. The land that Victoria Webb had tried to steal was now worth 10 times what she'd offered. And speaking of Victoria, she'd married eventually, a banker from back east who moved her to San Francisco. Eleanor heard about it from Mary, who heard it from the clerk at the general store. Victoria had finally gotten out of Cedar Ridge, but not in the triumph she'd imagined. Her husband's bank had failed in some kind of scandal, and she was back east living with relatives, her social ambitions in ruins. Eleanor felt no satisfaction in Victoria's downfall, just a kind of distant pity. Victoria had spent so much energy trying to tear others down that she'd forgotten to build anything for herself. Joseph Webb fared no better. His ranch struggled year after year. He married a woman from town. Not beautiful, not wealthy, just practical. And they had a quiet life together. Eleanor saw him sometimes when she went to town, and they'd nod to each other with the kind of distant politeness reserved for strangers. One day, when Sarah was 7, Joseph stopped Eleanor outside the general store. "Your daughter," he said, watching Sarah help load supplies into the wagon. "She's tall." "Yes, she is." "Does it bother her?" Eleanor looked at her daughter, strong and confident and utterly unconcerned with what anyone thought of her height. "No, why would it?" "No reason, just making conversation." He tipped his hat. "You did well, Eleanor, better than I deserved." "Yes, I did." He walked away, and Eleanor felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering hurt. Joseph Webb was just a man who'd made a mistake. She'd stopped giving him space in her head years ago. That night at supper, with Rowan at one end of the table and Eleanor at the other, with Sarah and the twins making noise and mess and chaos, Eleanor felt something she'd never felt in her aunt's boarding house in Boston. She felt like she belonged. "What are you smiling about?" Rowan asked. "Just thinking about how I got here." "Stagecoach, if I remember correctly." Before that, all the things that had to go wrong for things to go right. Sarah looked up from her plate. "What went wrong, Mama?" Eleanor considered how to explain. "I came out here to marry someone who decided he didn't want me. It felt like the worst thing that could happen. But if he had wanted me, I would never have met your father. Never would have had this ranch. Never would have had you. So it was good that the man didn't want you. It was good that I ended up where I was supposed to be." "Where's that?" "Here, with all of you." After the children were in bed, Eleanor and Rowan sat on the porch like they'd done hundreds of times before. The valley was dark except for stars, and the air was cool with the promise of autumn. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Eleanor asked. "Sometimes, but not often. This is where I want to be. Even with all the hard parts? Especially with the hard parts. They're what made this worth having." Eleanor thought about that, about how the easy path would have led to a small life in Boston, or maybe a loveless marriage to Joseph Webb, about how every hard choice, every moment of struggle had been a step towards something better. "I was 27 when I came here," she said. "I thought my life was over, that I'd missed my chance at happiness. And now? Now I know that sometimes the best things come after you've stopped looking for them. When you're just trying to survive and suddenly you realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're living." Rowan pulled her close. "We built something good here." "We did." "Something that'll last long after we're gone." Eleanor looked out at the ranch, the house they'd rebuilt, the barn they'd reconstructed after the fire, the land they'd fought to keep. She thought about Sarah, who would inherit all of this, about the twins, who would grow up knowing they belonged to something larger than themselves, about the legacy they were creating, not just of land and cattle, but of resilience and stubbornness and refusing to quit even when quitting made sense. "Yes," she said, "something that'll last." The years continued in their pattern. Good years and bad years, profit and loss, joy and grief. Curtis died in his sleep one winter, and they buried him on the hill overlooking the valley. Danny married a girl from town and started his own small ranch nearby. New hands came and went, but the core of the operation remained steady. Sarah grew into a woman as tall as Eleanor, strong and capable, and entirely unapologetic about it. She married a ranch hand from Montana, and together they expanded the horse breeding program until it was the most profitable part of the operation. The twins grew up competing at everything: who could rope faster, ride better, work harder. They took over the cattle operation when Rowan's knees started giving out, running it with the same stubborn determination their parents had shown. And Eleanor and Rowan grew old together, their hands more scarred and weathered with each passing year, their bodies breaking down from decades of hard work. But they were still there, still showing up, still doing what needed to be done. One spring morning, when Eleanor was 63 and Rowan was 68, they rode out to the north pasture together. The timber they'd sold decades ago had grown back, and new trees were reaching toward the sky. "You were right," Eleanor said, "about planting more, about it not being the end. I had no idea if I was right. I was just desperate." "We were both desperate. A lot. Still worked out." Eleanor looked at the man beside her. This man who'd taken a chance on a rejected bride and ended up with a partner who'd helped him build an empire. His hair was white now, his face lined, but his eyes were the same amber brown they'd always been. "I love you," she said. "I don't say it enough, but I do." "I know. I love you too." They rode back to the house as the sun climbed higher, warming the valley. And Eleanor thought about the girl she'd been, standing on that boardwalk in Cedar Ridge with 2 carpet bags and $18 and no idea what came next. That girl had been terrified, humiliated, convinced she was broken beyond repair. But that girl had also been strong enough to rebuild her life from nothing, brave enough to take a job in the middle of nowhere, stubborn enough to refuse to quit when everything said she should. That girl had become this woman, wife, mother, rancher. Someone who'd turned rejection into opportunity and failure into foundation. And if Eleanor could go back and tell that girl anything, it would be this: being too much for the wrong people just means you're exactly right for the right ones. And sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing, disguised as disaster. She'd been rejected for being too tall, but height was just strength wearing a different name. And strength, it turned out, was exactly what this land needed, what Rowan needed, what she needed to become the person she was meant to be. The ranch would outlive them. Sarah and her husband would run it, and then their children, and then their children's children. The land would remember Eleanor and Rowan, not because they'd been perfect, but because they'd been persistent, because they'd refused to let hardship define them. And somewhere, in some boarding house or small town, there was probably another woman being told she was too much of something. Too tall, too strong, too smart, too ambitious. Some woman standing at the edge of her own disaster, thinking her life was over. Eleanor hoped that woman would be stubborn enough to keep going, brave enough to bet on herself, strong enough to build something new from the wreckage of her old plans. Because sometimes, being unwanted by the wrong person is just the universe clearing the path to the right one. Sometimes rejection is just redirection. And sometimes, the life you end up with is so much better than the life you thought you wanted. Eleanor knew this now, in a way she hadn't known it at 27. She knew it in her bones, in the calluses on her hands, in the home she'd built from nothing but stubbornness and hope. She'd been too tall for Joseph Webb. Thank heaven for that, because she was exactly the right size for Rowan Creed, for this ranch, for this life. And in the end, that was all that mattered.